My day out in Yangon city this day took me to people and places that tells about the colonial period of the British Empire. Please recall our vlog number 4, Mandalay Palace, where we talked about the three Anglo-Burmese wars fought between the British and the Burmese kingdoms. The British annexed Upper Burma in 1885 to their Indian colony following the Three Anglo-Burmese Wars, and the entire Burma became the part of British India. In 1862, a treaty between King Mingdonmin, the then King of Burma, and the British Commissionerate was inked. This allowed for free movement of skilled and unskilled laborers under the aggressive British policy of importing labor. Since India was one of the bigger and more advanced British colonies in the region in terms of education, skills, and infrastructure, the movement of people of Indian origins was indelibly linked to expansion of British occupation in the Southeast Asia, especially in countries like Myanmar, Malaysia, Fiji, Mauritius, etc. In most of these countries, people of Indian origins occupied positions of authority under overall supervision of the British Empire. The major sectors recording their presence were education, judiciary, constitutional experts, medical practitioners, and so on. Imperialist domination made India the pivot of British Empire, and the vast reservoir of manpower were exploited to serve the colonial interest of the British. Large armies of laborers, soldiers, clerks, and traders migrated not only to Burma but to different parts of the empire to serve the politico-economic interest of Britain. Having left in search of greener pastures from their native villages, the Indian working class braved the seas, provided the much needed labor to clear the swamps in lower Burma and the malaria infested jungles, and in that process also became the most exploited and vulnerable section of the Indian population. After the migration of unskilled laborers and farmers, Burma became the largest exporter of rice, leading to a higher demand of labor in the country. The British started exporting rice globally, which led to the rise of port towns in Yangon, Bassein, Sittwe, and Moulmein. Until the First World War, these towns were mainly occupied by the hired in the rice processing mills, and the export and management of processing activities were taken over by the British. Indians mostly came after First Anglo-Burmese War between 1824 and 1826 to relocate from Bengal, Bihar, and South India under the Madras and Bengal Presidency. Tamils form the majority of Indians in Burma. Tamils had the earliest contact with the Myanmar during the 1st or 2nd century CE. The Tamils Chola Empire had trade relationship with various Burmese kingdoms. However, the massive Tamil migration to Myanmar began during British colonial era. Although the Burmese economy and transportation infrastructure developed rapidly from 1890 to 1900, the majority of Burmese people did not benefit from it. A railway had been built through the entire valley of the Irrawaddy, and hundreds of steamboats plied the length of the river. But the railway and the boats belonged to the British companies. Roads had been built by the government, but they were meant for swift transport of troops. A British company worked the ruby mines until they became nearly exhausted. The extraction of petroleum and timber was monopolized by two British firms. The balance of trade was always in favor of Burma, but that meant little to Burmese people or society. In 1920, it was learnt that Burma would be excluded from new reforms introduced in India. This led to a countrywide protest which involved a boycott of British goods. As the nationalist movement in Burma began to gather momentum, it also took an anti Indian dimension. The Burmese entry into labor markets following the Great Depression in 1930s, the opening of the Rangoon University, and the consequent turnout of Burmese graduates searching for clerical jobs, all these proved as catalyst for the growth of anti-Indian sentiments. There were large-scale riots against the Indians in the 1930s due to socio-economic and cultural reasons. The period of Japanese occupation of Burma was the darkest period in the history of Indian community in Burma. Rangoon was first bombed on 23rd December 1941. The flow of refugees began soon after the bombing of Rangoon and increased to a mass exodus in February 1942 as the Indian, Anglo-Indian and Anglo-Burmese population of Burma fled to India, fearing both the Japanese and hostile Burmese. Middle class Indians and mixed race refugees could often afford to buy tickets on ships or even planes, while ordinary laborers and their families, in many cases, were forced to make their way on foot. At least 5 lakh civilian fugitives left the country, and out of these, half of them died on the way. Those who were left in Rangoon joined the Indian National Army in large numbers. In later months, 70 to 80% of those who reached India were afflicted with diseases such as dysentery, smallpox, malaria, or cholera, with 30% desperately so. In January 1942, the Japanese army invaded Burma. The British defeat at the hands of the Japanese in 1942 marked the longest retreat in British Army history. It also marked the beginning of the end of British rule not only in Burma but also in South and Southeast Asia. Between 1940 and 1942, many Malaysian and Burmese Tamils were forced by Japanese occupiers to labor on a 415-kilometer railway track between Thailand and Burma. Over 150,000 Tamils died during the project due to venomous animals, exhaustion, and Japanese torture. This devastating toll earned the railway line its infamous name, the Death Railway, which remains associated with it today. The rail line was built along River Kwai. The Japanese occupation of Burma was the period between 1942 and 1945. However, by April 1945, the Allies had driven out the Japanese. The British partitioned Burma from India in 1937 in order to weaken Burmese nationalist movement. Burma became an independent republic on 4th January 1948. After the end of the colonial rule, stricter immigration regimes were enforced to discourage Indian immigration. There was a steep rise in the ultra nationalist sentiments in Myanmar. A large number of progressive measures and legislations were passed. Government introduced Burmanization of public services in the 1950s. Large number of Indians employed in various sectors were retrenched. There was demonetization of currency notes, expropriation of properties, confiscation of valuables, and unimaginable miseries. No compensations paid. The Indian community has now been reduced to becoming one of the most impoverished sections in the country. The policies enacted by General Nevin and subsequent military rulers curtail all freedoms, rights, and privileges the Indian community enjoyed in Myanmar. The Indian communities are no longer recognized as an ethnic minority. They were classified as an alien minority, leading to a suffocating death to their status in Myanmar. For the Chinese diaspora who migrated in waves through history, respite came when China's influence grew in Myanmar. In 2004, it was estimated that there are 2.9 million people of Indian origin, constituting about 4% of the total population of that country. Out of that, 2.5 million are people of Indian origin, 2,000 Indian citizens, and 4 lakh are stateless. It is the expectation of the Indian community of Myanmar that, considering Myanmar's great importance to India economically, strategically, and geopolitically, it is in the best interest of India to engage with Myanmar government bilaterally to resolve the issue of citizenship and offer a better standard of living to the Indian communities in that country. That's all. Yangon